bear in mind that for the last 30 years, a lot of Australians, business and academic and even government, have spent a good deal of their life trying to build a good relationship with China. So to a certain extent, they feel let down. They feel let down by China, and they feel let down by the Australian government that the relationship has drifted apart. Therefore, as far as Chinese readers are concerned, nothing has been happening anyway. This is Australia hasn't been trading with them, not that China has been stopping trading. And there's always a possibility that China will see that as an opportunity to take another step forward and try and be more assertive. So I'm sort of concerned about the grey zone getting worse and worse, and the possibility of that leading to a possibly violent conflict.
Welcome to our YouTube channel. Today we once again delve into the relationship between Australia and China. Has Australia shifted from being critical to pro-China? We'll explore the nuances of this evolving dynamic. Considering factors like the sizable Chinese-Australian population and Cantonese versus Mandarin speakers. As China's influence grows, should the West reciprocate amidst escalating aggressions? Welcome to the show.
Hi everyone, welcome to the show. Today our guest is Peter Layton. He's a visiting fellow Griffith Asia Institute and also Associate Fellow Royal United Services Institute. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I have a question at the beginning. I think Australia's situation has changed quite a lot because in 2020 we had your Prime Minister Scott Morrison calling for a Wuhan virus probe. Then he visited Taiwan in 2023. And now, a few years later, we have what? We have a very pro-China Wang Yi visits. I think that was a huge success for their diplomacy. So what has changed? Why is Australia now so much more pro-China?
I'm not sure it's pro-China in quite the way that you're hinting at there. I suppose that the Chinese have compromised and come on board. So the Chinese, there's certainly been a soft power push out here with a lot of Chinese government officials stressing that what Australia needs to focus on is the economic aspects of the relationship. So we should sort of think about mines, about sending them iron ore, lobsters and wine, and we should look and virtually only look at just those trade aspects. They at the same time as selling the importance of trade, they've been very careful to say that they don't want to talk about anything else.
Yeah, but this visit has been portrayed in the media as you know, as a gain for China, like a meeting with a former Prime Minister Keating, right? That was a huge win for China.
Well, I mean, it's the old story about the media, sort of how much spin that you put on this. Certainly, our current government in Australia is saying that this is a huge win for the exporters of goods and services from Australia, because we can get back to focusing on trade rather than on other issues. By the same token, as you say, the Chinese are quite happy to play up that Australia has for some reason come back into the fold. Now, bear in mind, you know, the Chinese press and the Global Times is a classic example of this. Tends to only look obviously at the positive things from a Chinese viewpoint, and they've never owned up or stated they are putting trade sanctions and other sanctions on Australia. Therefore, as far as Chinese readers are concerned, nothing has been happening anyway. This is just Australia hasn't been trading with them, not that China has been stopping trading. So everything still goes on the same as far as the alliance with the US just gets deeper and deeper. At the present time, there's a lot of talk about the South China Sea and about China's actions there, and China's actions have been generating a lot of unfavourable press as far as as far as what should Australia do? And it seems that the government has decided that while we're going to trade with the Chinese, we will send some warships for a Philippine, Japan, US exercise in the South China Sea very soon, which is sure to upset the Chinese if they report it in their domestic press.
Okay, you've written quite extensively about China's gray zone tactics. You just mentioned it a little bit. So I would like to know, how is China's influence in Australia? I know a few years back, I think it has been quite strong, quite a lot. How is it nowadays?
Oh, there's still a significant influence per se. People are a lot more wary. Certainly, I mean, an indication about how things have transpired, I suppose, is that there's still not a lot of Australian tourists going back to China. People are certainly concerned about travelling there, whether they would be welcome or whether that there's a slight chance of being thrown into prison. There's all of these other issues that tend to cloud the tourist field. But there's certainly a number of businessmen flocking back, hoping to secure deals. By the same token, there's a lot of risk management going on because the business people are very well aware that things could be suddenly turned off once more. So they want to minimise their losses if there's a change downstream. Bear in mind, of course, there are a lot of Chinese Australians. I think about 5% of the population of Australia could be classified as Chinese Australian. But of course, that's a very broad definition there, and the Chinese have been coming here since about 1850, since the gold rushes of the mid 1800s. So a lot of Chinese Australians have been here for 100 years or so. So their links to China are fairly tenuous. By the same token, since about the early 1990s, there's been a reasonable number of, if you like, modern Chinese come, and they're Mandarin speakers. Before, we used to get a lot of Cantonese speakers from Hong Kong, and if you like, fleeing Hong Kong, and that the Cantonese speakers and the other Chinese are not terribly pro-Chinese. Some of them can be fairly anti-communist party for obvious reasons. The modern Chinese from from the middle 1990s are Mandarin speakers and more pro the party, not least because they tend to watch mainly Chinese social media. Like sort of all of us, we find talking in our native language easiest, and that's the easiest way they can keep up. So there's but we have a government run multinational television station here that provides news in various languages, Mandarin and Cantonese, etc. But there's still quite a lot of Chinese influence, and there's still a lot of optimists, I suppose, out there. Bear in mind that for the last 30 years, a lot of Australians, business and academic, and even government, have spent a good deal of their life trying to build a good relationship with China. So to a certain extent, they feel let down. They feel let down by China, and they feel let down by the Australian government that the relationship has drifted apart. No one can see the relationship going back to say what it was in, say, 2012 when Xi Jinping came to power. Those days, by common consensus, if you like, appear to have passed.
If you believe in me, please like it, leave a comment and share the show with friends. It might not look like it, but I have quite a lot of expenses. I am not asking for money, only for support. The goal of this program is to spread the knowledge.
Okay, I know you also wrote interestingly about reciprocating China's aggressive behavior. Could you please elaborate a little bit? What did you mean by that?
Okay, so China's a big country and plays lots of games, if you like. So China wants to do two things. China ultimately wants us to respect China as a great and powerful nation, as a great and powerful player, if you like, in the region, as the big regional player. And it wants this respect, and it seems to think that the way about doing that is a combination of carrots and sticks. At the same time, as Machiavelli said, both to be loved and feared. It's a curious business, but clearly that love and those carrots are the economic trade. And Australia and China remains Australia's largest trading partner by far. Not largest investor in Australia, but largest trading partner. But the fear part of it is in things like the South China Sea, and there China has been becoming increasingly. We used to say assertive, but we now say aggressive towards the Philippines. So the Philippine exclusive economic zone goes out a couple hundred miles from the shore, but the Chinese claim almost all of the South China Sea as its domestic territorial state, if you like. And they've passed a law whereby, in fact, the South China Sea, so China says, is in fact under Chinese domestic law. So China's becoming increasingly assertive, using blocking tactics, stopping Philippine ships going into their EEZ, putting fire hoses on them, those high pressure fire hoses, trying to ram them, divert them from their path, generally be extremely annoying. And your European listeners might sort of recall back those cod wars that the Brits and the Icelandic people have. Well, it's a bit like that. But the problem is that this has all been going on now for about 10 years, and each year China's tactics get more and more aggressive, and this is a bad trend line. So over the last 10 years, everyone has accommodated China, and if you like, appeased China and not pushed back much at all. Been some slight pushback, but nothing terribly sort of dramatic. But I think the time now is to say, okay, how about you stop doing this, China, because the trend line looks like leading to increasing violence, and we don't want these grey zone actions to lead into a major conflict in the South China Sea. So pushback is always carries some risks, because everyone's always concerned about escalation from, if you like, peaceful violence into military violence. But the Chinese have been giving us their playbook, and there's some great websites now that, in fact, virtually sort of lay out the Chinese playbook. So I think it's time that we use the Chinese playbook against China, against the Chinese Coast Guard, and the Chinese state also uses armed fishing vessels as well. So I think, if they put fire hoses, if you like, on the Philippines, then it's time to put the fire hoses back on the Chinese Coast Guard ship. It's to send a message and send a signal. Now, as I said, the concern naturally is the escalation might lead somewhere bad, but China's has been doing this for 10 years now, without escalating too far, I suppose. If we don't push back at some stage, this will end badly.
I wanted still to ask you, what is Australia actually doing now in terms of defense? Because I think the AUKUS program or project ran into some difficulties. And I know that recently General Angus Campbell, he ended his 6-year tenure as your chief of Australia's military. And I think he's been a controversial figure. Is it really justified? Like, was it really such a bad time? Or what do you think about that?
I think, well, it's an interesting question. So he's been there for 6 years, and over 6 years, you're bound to make some decisions that others agree with. And certainly some particular parts of the army are very much aggrieved that the general, who's after all an army general, and they thought would look after the army, that General Campbell, if you like, has taken, perhaps one could say, a more balanced view, and hasn't necessarily favoured the army over the other services, and hasn't favoured the military over the civilian side of defence either. So I think the criticism is a little unfair, but nonetheless, as you said, he's a controversial figure. he has also steered the Department of Defence, or the Australian Defence Force, through a change of a government. So he moved from, if you like, a conservative government into a Labor government, which is more sort of held to be left wing. But to be honest, as Australia has compulsory voting, governments only get into power if they rush towards the centre. They can't be extreme like, say, the Americans and go extreme right or extreme left, because they won't get enough votes. So they have to appeal to both left and right. So both have been relatively centrist governments. These are not radical governments. Now, what appears to have happened is that the previous government made a bunch of promises that they would buy a certain range of military hardware, and they would expand the Australian Defence Force. But in the budget, they haven't actually added extra money. So the budget looks out roughly about sort of 5 years. It's just it is a 12-month budget, but the budget planning cycle goes out 5 years. So this new government came into power, and it said, perhaps foolishly, it said, we will match exactly the budget that the previous government and the Conservative government always see the stronger defence. We will match their budget for the next 5 years. Then they opened up the book, if you like, and opened up the bank, and they found, well, actually, there was not enough money for what had been foretold and announced, which meant that the current government has introduced a number of budgetary strictures, and they've cut a few projects. And this afternoon, they are about to cut a few more projects, and a move away from, if you like, having a balanced force, with the idea that we could go back and do peacekeeping ops in the Middle East once more. So therefore, having a bit of an army heavy focus. They're sort of cutting the army to then build up the Navy and the Air Force, to have a maritime focus, because the current government sees that the strategic issues are in the Asia Pacific region, and in particular in the South China Sea. So the current government has a problem about the budget, just isn't there, and yet again it is irritating the army, which of course reflects upon General Campbell, because General Campbell's there as well. So there's a bit of angst about that.
Studio Asia is an independent channel. I am neither looking for sponsors, nor asking you for donations. I value much more your comment under this interview. It means a lot to me, a lot. Subscribing and sharing helps me to be promoted by YouTube. I will appreciate it very, very much.
What do you think coming next? Like, is there Chinese Prime Minister's visit coming, and maybe later Xi Jinping's? Do you think that's all possible?
It's possible, but probably not for a couple of years or so. I think having the Chinese foreign minister out here, etc., that was a high watermark. I think things will be, as the current government says, stabilised about now, and the current government will focus on trade as well, and won't say anything about China, if you like. And the Chinese will focus on trade and not say anything except for trade. There are clearly where it's a very difficult time. There's a number of wars going on. The Chinese are sort of involved helping the Russians, there's all concerns there. There's the grey zone aspects of China, which, as I said, becomes increasingly worrying each day. So China may upset that particular happy sort of view that I have about things stabilising. The current government may be forced into being more assertive about China. China, for example, has 3 or 4 Australians they are keeping in their prisons. Now, should something happen to one of those, the Australian public will not be happy. They're Chinese Australians who went back to China, perhaps foolishly, and have fallen afoul of the Chinese Communist Party. So I think the Australians would want to stabilise the relationship. In fact, the Defence Minister and the Prime Minister go to considerable trouble and verbal gymnastics, if you like, to avoid saying China is a possible military threat downstream. There's always the region and a major power. And China is never, ever mentioned about being a defence issue at all. But it's sort of one of those things that everybody knows what code that the defence minister and the prime minister is talking in, but it's not publicly expressed. Therefore, it's not a foreign relations issue. On the other hand, they're very keen about expanding Chinese trade. So I think that if you like, the ball is in China's court, and if China chooses to sort of step back a little bit, and if you like, be peaceful and friendly and try and stabilise as well, then the next couple of years should be fine. But of course, there's the uncertainty about President Trump and Taiwan and various other issues. So, good question.
Okay, my last question is, what do you foresee in 2024-25? What would you be researching? What do you think is coming at us?
What's coming at us? So I'm particularly concerned about the Ukraine war ending with some form of Russian victory, if you like. There's been a perception in Australia, and it could just be a perception that maybe is ill-founded, that in some particular way, the European nations, whether it's the EU or the UK, may have a greater presence in the Indo-Pacific over the next sort of few years. But I think if the Ukraine war ends badly, then I don't think that Europe will be sort of heading eastwards, if you like, into the Indo-Pacific region. So I'm concerned about that big stress, geostrategic shifts, if you like, especially given that there's a possibility of Donald Trump coming back. And I would think, and of course that may not happen. So that's sort of one of those alternative futures that we're all unsure about. But we would possibly expect that next year there'll be a fair bit of dysfunction in the American governmental system. If Donald Trump wins or loses, it'll be dysfunctional, which probably means that foreign affairs won't be terribly high on the agenda, which means that we might have to look after ourselves to a fair degree. And there's always a possibility that China will see that as an opportunity to take another step forward and try and be more assertive. So I'm sort of concerned about the grey zone getting worse and worse, and the possibility of that leading into a possibly violent conflict. That's our sort of foreign affairs. You've also got to bear in mind that this government is unsure about the Chinese-US relationship as well, and sort of all that stuff. It's putting a lot of effort into building bridges and deepening relationships with the Southwest Pacific nations, those small island nations, and with the ASEAN bloc. So in the defence and strategic space, I think next year there'll still be quite a push to deepen and strengthen all of those linkages. Because we're rapidly signing a whole pile of agreements in the Southwest Pacific and with Indonesia, and South Korea is up there. Japan was what was signed up even more about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So Australia's fallback is to strengthen and deepen the relationship with the neighbours, and that includes Japan and South Korea. So I'm focusing on that on that deepening the relationship with the neighbours and Chinese grey zone.
Thank you very much for your time and for your insights. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you very much.
I have so many other fantastic interviews on this and similar topics. Please check out my channel.